I was 24 years old, heavily pregnant, and sitting stiffly at my parents' long oak dinner table in Chandler, Arizona. The ceiling fan above me whirred lazily, stirring the warm desert air that filtered through the open window, but nothing could cool the anxiety simmering in my chest. I had already been feeling off all day, tightness in my lower back, a dull ache behind my knees, the kind of signs every pregnancy book told me to look out for, but I had brushed it off, knowing how the slightest discomfort could be overanalyzed when you were this close to the end. My due date wasn't for another 3 weeks, and I had been determined to make it through tonight's dinner without causing a scene. My younger sister Mia was home from college, and my parents had planned the evening around her. She had just gotten engaged a few weeks earlier, and the table was dressed to match the occasion, flutes of pink champagne, white candles flickering in polished holders, and a vanilla sheet cake that read, "Congratulations, Mia," in swirly red icing. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, pressing my palm gently against my rounded belly. The baby kicked hard, like a tiny fist punching from the inside. That's when the cramp hit me, sharp and low, wrapping around my waist like a band of fire. My hand clenched the edge of the table as the pain swept through me, stealing my breath. It wasn't like the Braxton Hicks I'd been having on and off the past few weeks. This was deeper. Real. Unmistakable. I inhaled sharply, trying to hold my voice steady, but there was a tremble I couldn't hide when I said, "I think I'm in labor." My mother looked up from her glass of wine, her expression caught between amusement and irritation. She let out a small, almost mocking laugh as if I had just claimed I was seeing aliens. "You're not due for weeks," she said dismissively, waving her hand like I was being dramatic. My father didn't even look at me, just kept cutting into his steak with slow, deliberate motions, the sound of the knife scraping against the ceramic plate making my skin crawl. "We're not doing this tonight," my mom added firmly, her tone sharp like broken glass. "This is Mia's night." I blinked, stunned. The contraction was still fading, but my mind was reeling faster than my body. "I'm serious," I said, pushing back from the table with both hands on my belly, trying to breathe through it like my prenatal class instructor had taught me. "It really hurts, Mom." Her eyes hardened. She stood up and started collecting plates like the conversation hadn't even happened. "It's false labor. You're probably just bloated." "Don't make this about you," she muttered, stacking silverware over half-eaten food. I looked to Mia, hoping for some kind of support, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. She was picking at her phone, a small smirk tugging at her lips. She had always loved being the center of attention, and I could practically feel her willing me to shut up and sit down. The pain returned, more intense this time, radiating down my legs and twisting in my spine. I bent over with a quiet gasp, one hand braced against the back of my chair. I could feel sweat beading at the base of my neck. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't confused or looking for attention. My water hadn't broken yet, but everything in my body was screaming that it would soon. I needed to go to the hospital. Now. "I need to leave," I said, louder this time. "I need to go. Someone please take me." My dad finally looked up from his plate, chewing slowly, his face expressionless. "We just sat down to eat," he said, his voice flat. "If it's real, call a cab." "You want me to call a cab?" I asked, incredulous, my voice cracking. "I'm in labor." "We told you not to come here tonight if you were going to pull this," my mom snapped, setting the cake on the counter with a thud. "You always find a way to make things about yourself. You couldn't let Mia have one nice dinner." I stood frozen, hand on my side, breath ragged. The pain was coming quicker now, less space between each wave. I knew enough to realize my labor was progressing fast. Too fast. I felt a sudden warm trickle down my thigh, and when I looked down, I saw the unmistakable wet spot spreading down the inside of my light cotton dress. My water had broken. Nobody moved. Not even then. I turned, heart pounding, and stumbled toward the door. "I'm calling an Uber," I said, more to myself than to them. I fumbled with my phone, fingers shaking as I opened the app. I could barely focus on the screen, my vision blurring with tears and panic and anger. They didn't care. They weren't going to help me. "I'll drive you," a voice said softly from the doorway. It was my cousin Rachel, who had arrived late and was still standing with her coat over one arm, a look of disbelief on her face. She glanced between me and my parents, her mouth slightly open in shock. "You guys are just going to let her go through this alone?" she asked them. "What the hell is wrong with you?" My mother scoffed and poured herself another glass of wine, refusing to answer. My father got up to clear his plate, shaking his head like this whole situation was just a bad joke. "You're overreacting," he muttered under his breath. Rachel didn't wait for another word. She helped me down the front steps and into her car, holding my hand the entire time. I was breathing hard, trying to stay upright as another contraction hit, my fingernails digging into the passenger seat. The drive to the hospital felt endless, but Rachel kept talking to me, keeping me grounded, telling me it was going to be okay. That I was going to be okay. I didn't even look back at the house. I couldn't. Mia, my younger sister, was sitting at the head of the table like some kind of princess, her cheeks flushed from the champagne our parents had chilled just for her, and her eyes sparkling every time someone mentioned her fiancé, Jake. He was a tech investor out of San Francisco, some hotshot with a sleek condo and a Tesla and a recent $12 million funding round that had my parents foaming at the mouth with pride. They spoke about him like he was royalty, like he had descended from some higher plane of success to grace our family with his brilliance. My mom had even started calling him our future son-in-love, and my dad went as far as joking, more than once, that he'd retire early once Jake taught him how to get rich. Meanwhile, I sat there at the other end of the table, 9 months pregnant, ankle swollen, back aching, and feeling more like a shadow than their daughter. They barely looked in my direction unless I asked for the salt or got up to use the bathroom, which I had done at least 5 times already because the baby was pressing directly on my bladder. Every time I shifted or winced or touched my belly, I caught my mother's eye roll or saw Mia lean slightly away, as if I were contagious. I had tried to ignore the growing discomfort because I knew exactly how it would go if I said anything. The last time I mentioned a weird twinge or even asked a question about the baby, my mom snapped that I was always dramatic and reminded me that she had birthed 2 kids without whining. But now, the pain was unmistakable. The contractions were getting closer together, and each one lasted longer than the last. I checked the clock again, barely 5 minutes since the last one. I took a deep breath, looked around the table, and said again, more urgently this time, "I need someone to drive me to the hospital. I'm in labor. This is happening." My voice wasn't shaking anymore, it was firm, edged with panic. I could feel my body starting to take over, the way everyone told me it would. This wasn't something I could slow down or ignore. The baby was coming, whether anyone cared or not. I placed one hand against the table to steady myself, the other cradling my belly, and I watched the faces around me shift, not to concern or action, but to annoyance. My father snapped his fork down onto his plate with a loud clatter. He didn't look up, just growled, "We're eating," like I had asked him to cancel a vacation or give up his retirement savings. His tone was clipped and final, like my request was nothing more than an inconvenient interruption. My mother didn't say a word, she just picked up her wine glass and stared at me like I had personally ruined her night. Mia sighed dramatically and muttered something under her breath to Jake, who responded with a half-smile and went right back to scrolling on his phone. I stared at them, frozen, my heart racing not from the labor pain but from the absolute disbelief that this was actually happening, that the people who raised me, the people who were supposed to be my safety net, were more concerned about finishing their garlic mashed potatoes than the fact that I was about to bring a human being into the world. My husband, Tyler, was still unreachable. He had texted me earlier to say his meeting was running late, and after that, radio silence. I had tried calling him 3 times already, and each time it went straight to voicemail. We had talked for weeks about having a plan in place when the time came, but of course, life had other ideas. I opened my mouth to speak again, to plead maybe, but nothing came out. The pain hit harder now, my whole abdomen tightening like a fist, and I had to grip the back of my chair just to stay upright. The thought of having this baby alone, without even a ride to the hospital, began to settle like a stone in my chest. I looked around one last time, hoping, praying for someone to stand up, to offer to help, to at least acknowledge that I was more than just a nuisance. But all I saw was indifference. Jake took another sip of his drink. Mia leaned over to show him a meme on her phone. My father resumed eating like nothing had happened. I turned away from the table, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts as another wave of pain crested. I was drenched in sweat, my hands trembling. I knew then, without question, that no one at that table was going to help me. My mother didn't even look up from her glass of wine when she finally spoke again, she just swirled the liquid around like she was lost in thought, then said flatly, "Just call an Uber," as if she were suggesting I order takeout or go for a walk to cool off. There was no urgency in her voice, no flicker of concern in her expression, only that tight-lipped irritation she wore whenever I did something that pulled focus away from Mia. It was like I had asked her to help carry groceries, not that I was in active labor with her grandchild. My heart thudded in my chest, more from shock than pain, and for a second I actually stood there, waiting, thinking maybe she would realize how serious this was, maybe she'd soften, or even stand up and help, but no. Nothing changed. Mia just looked up from her phone and gave me this condescending little smirk, the same one she used to give me in high school when she won something I wanted, and said, "Relax. You're being dramatic." Dramatic. That word hit me harder than the contractions. I was sweating, shaking, bent forward with pain radiating down my back and into my hips, and they were acting like I was throwing a tantrum because I couldn't handle a bit of discomfort. I pressed one hand to the wall to steady myself as another contraction came, stronger than the last, wrapping around my entire midsection like a vice. My knees buckled slightly and I gasped, trying to stay upright and in control, breathing in hard through my nose, out through clenched teeth. I had read all the books. I had gone to every class. I knew what active labor felt like, and this was it. I could feel my body opening, preparing, pushing me forward, and the fear that I might give birth right there in my parents' living room started to rise in my throat like bile. Still, no one moved. No one even pretended to care. My dad was cutting into his second helping of roast beef like I hadn't said a word. My mom was already leaning across the table to talk to Jake about his company's new office space. Mia had gone back to scrolling Instagram. It was like I didn't exist in the room at all. Like I was an inconvenience they'd rather ignore until I went away. So I left. Without another word, without another glance, I turned and walked out the front door, biting my lip hard enough to draw blood as another contraction tightened my entire abdomen. The sky outside had already darkened, the December evening cool against my flushed skin, and the wind hit my face like a slap. I made it to my car, a scratched-up, 10-year-old silver Honda I had bought second-hand when I was 21, and fumbled with the keys until I could finally slide into the driver's seat. My hands were trembling as I started the engine, and the dashboard lights flared to life like a warning. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles white, and took a deep, shaky breath. The pain came again before I had even backed out of the driveway, and I doubled over against the wheel, groaning into the fabric of my winter coat. Every instinct in me screamed that I shouldn't be doing this alone. That it was dangerous. That I could barely focus enough to drive, let alone through 25 minutes of traffic and intersections and red lights. But I didn't have a choice. I was done begging. I was done waiting for someone to see me. I checked my mirrors through blurred eyes, eased the car into reverse, and pulled out of the driveway as quickly and smoothly as I could manage. My parents' house disappeared behind me without a single soul coming out to check on me, no porch light flicking on, no voice calling after me. The pain kept coming in waves, each one more intense than the last, but I kept driving. My right hand gripped the wheel, my left occasionally pressing into my lower belly, trying to counteract the pressure. Every red light felt like a betrayal. I screamed once, loud, guttural, raw, when a contraction hit at a busy intersection, and I had to slam my foot against the brake to avoid rolling into the car in front of me. I don't know how I kept the car moving, how I stayed conscious, how I didn't crash. My vision swam. My breathing was erratic. I could feel the baby pressing lower, a deep, dragging sensation inside of me that made it hard to even sit upright. I couldn't open my phone to call Tyler. I couldn't even look at my GPS. I knew the route well enough, had driven it dozens of times for appointments, but every minute felt like an hour. The world around me blurred into a tunnel of headlights and motion. My fingers hurt from how hard I was clenching the steering wheel. My thighs were soaked, I didn't know if it was from more amniotic fluid or if my body was already starting to bleed, and the seat beneath me was slick. I didn't dare stop. I just kept going, one breath at a time, whispering through gritted teeth, almost there. Almost there. Just a little longer. 25 of the longest minutes of my life. No help. No support. Just me, my unborn baby, and the pain that was splitting me open from the inside as I drove myself to the hospital. Somewhere between the 10th contraction and the highway exit sign for Mesa, I realized I couldn't do this completely alone. My hands were cramping from gripping the steering wheel, and my face was wet with tears I hadn't even noticed falling. I reached for my phone, fumbling with it at a red light, and managed to hit Haley's name, the only person I knew would answer without hesitation. It rang twice before she picked up, and I didn't even have to say a full sentence. She heard the panic in my voice, the shaky breath, the pain as I choked out, "I'm in labor. I'm driving myself." They wouldn't help me. There was a sharp silence on the other end, then a single word, furious and loud, "What?" I could hear her trying to stay calm, but her voice cracked as she asked again, "They left you? Your parents just let you leave?" I nodded even though she couldn't see me, and another contraction made me groan into the phone. I was panting now, barely able to speak, and Haley switched into action mode like I knew she would. "Okay, listen to me," she said, her voice low and firm, steadying me even from a distance. "You're going to make it. I'm getting in my car right now. I'll meet you at Mesa Medical. I'm not letting you go through this by yourself." There was something about hearing those words, someone finally acknowledging what was happening, someone choosing to show up, that broke me wide open, but I didn't have time to cry. I just nodded again and whispered, "Thank you," before hanging up and dropping the phone onto the passenger seat. Just as I was pulling off the freeway, Tyler finally called me back. The phone lit up and vibrated again and again before I could pick it up, and when I answered, all I could do was sob his name. "Tyler," I gasped, trying to speak through the pain. "It's happening. They wouldn't help. I'm driving myself." There was a pause, just a second, but I heard the shift in his voice immediately. "Where are you now? Are you safe?" "Jesus, I'm leaving the office right now. I'll meet you there. Just hold on, baby. You're gonna be okay." I could hear him already gathering his things, papers rustling, doors opening, his voice rising as he barked something to a colleague before coming back to me. "Don't hang up unless you have to. Just stay with me. I'm coming." But I had to hang up. The hospital was finally in sight, the red ER sign glowing like a beacon in the dark. I pulled into the parking lot, barely managing to swerve into a spot without sideswiping the car next to me. My entire body was on fire. I tried to lift myself out of the driver's seat and felt a bolt of pain shoot down my spine, my muscles seizing as my uterus contracted again, harder than ever. I cried out and grabbed the doorframe for balance, one hand on my belly, the other bracing myself against the side of the car. The cold air hit my face like a slap as I staggered forward, step by agonizing step, toward the sliding glass doors of the emergency room. I could feel my legs trembling with each movement, my vision swimming with exhaustion and pain and fear. The fluorescent lights above the entrance were blinding, the glass doors a blur through the fog of tears and sweat on my face. As I got closer, I nearly collapsed. I had to pause just outside the entrance, bent over at the waist, clutching the concrete railing, moaning through another contraction that felt like it might tear me in half. A couple standing nearby glanced at me, alarmed, but no one came forward. The doors opened automatically, and I forced myself inside, breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. I was alone, doubled over in the sterile brightness of the hospital lobby, dragging my feet across the tile floor toward the reception desk. My coat was soaked, my hair stuck to my face, and my hands were shaking uncontrollably. The nurse behind the counter looked up and saw the panic on my face, the way I was barely staying upright, and immediately got on her feet. But for those first few seconds, I was just there by myself, no wheelchair, no helping hands, no familiar face. Just me, dragging my body through one of the most terrifying moments of my life, because the people who should have cared, didn't. Tyler burst through the emergency room doors just minutes later, his hair disheveled, tie half loosened, chest heaving as he scanned the room in panic until his eyes locked onto me. The relief on his face was immediate and overwhelming, like he had been holding his breath for too long and could finally breathe again. He rushed to my side, dropping his bag on the floor, and took my hand in both of his like he was afraid I might disappear if he let go. His palm was warm and slightly shaking, and the moment he touched me, something inside me finally broke. I sobbed hard, the kind of cry that comes from fear and exhaustion and shock all tangled together, and he leaned down, pressing his forehead to mine, whispering over and over that he was there now, that I was safe, that I did an incredible job getting myself there. From that moment on, he didn't leave my side. Not when the nurses rushed me into a room. Not when they hooked me up to monitors and confirmed what I already knew, that I was deep into active labor. Not when the pain intensified to a level I didn't know was possible, when my body felt like it was tearing itself apart from the inside. Tyler stayed right there, holding my hand through every contraction, wiping my face with a cold cloth, talking to me in a steady voice even when his own eyes were glossy with fear. Hours blurred together in a haze of pain, pressure, shouting, and tears, but through all of it, I could feel him anchoring me, reminding me that I wasn't alone anymore. When our son was finally born, everything else faded away. The moment they placed him on my chest, red-faced and crying, slick with life and warmth, I felt something profound and indescribable crack open inside me. Tyler let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob, and his tears fell freely onto my shoulder as he kissed my forehead, my cheek, my hair, anywhere he could reach. We cried together, overwhelmed and stunned and so impossibly happy. This tiny human, this perfect little boy, was here. We had made him. We had survived that night. For a brief moment, the world narrowed to just the three of us, and nothing else mattered. But even as happiness washed over me, something darker simmered beneath it. Anger. Deep, burning anger that refused to be smothered. While I lay there exhausted, body aching, stitches tugging, emotions raw and exposed, my phone buzzed on the side table. Tyler reached for it automatically, then hesitated and handed it to me instead. I saw the notification before I even unlocked the screen, a voicemail from my mom. My stomach twisted. I listened to it while holding my newborn son in my arms. Her voice was calm, almost casual, like she was leaving a message about dinner plans. "You're fine, Ashley," she said. "We knew you'd be okay. We couldn't just leave. Liam's startup could change Mia's future." She paused briefly, then added, "Call me when you're settled." And that was it. No apology. No concern. No acknowledgement of what she had done. I stared at my phone, stunned by how little it took for her to dismiss one of the most terrifying moments of my life. She hadn't asked if I was safe. She hadn't asked about the baby. She hadn't even pretended to feel bad. In her mind, abandoning me in active labor was justified because my sister's boyfriend's money mattered more. I felt my chest tighten, not from pain this time, but from a cold, clarifying rage. Tyler saw the look on my face and didn't need to hear the message to understand. He wrapped an arm around me and our son, holding us close, grounding me. I kissed my baby's tiny forehead, breathing him in, feeling his heartbeat against my chest. I was happy. I was grateful. I was in love with this little life we had brought into the world. And at the same time, I had never been more certain of one thing in my life. I would never forget what they chose that night. I hadn't even finished processing my mother's voicemail when my phone buzzed again, this time with a call from my dad. I stared at the screen for a long second before answering, part of me hoping, stupidly, that maybe this would be different, that maybe hearing his voice would bring some acknowledgement of what I had just been through. Instead, the moment I said hello, he spoke in that same blunt, dismissive tone I had heard at the dinner table earlier. "You made it," he said, like I had arrived late to a movie. "So what's the big deal?" There was no concern in his voice, no hesitation, no recognition that his daughter had driven herself to the hospital in active labor. I felt something in me go completely still, like a door quietly slamming shut. Before I could even respond, another notification lit up my screen. A text from Mia. I didn't want to open it, but I did anyway, my hand shaking slightly as I read the words. "You always make everything about you. Liam's deal was more important." That was it. No question about whether I was okay. No acknowledgement that I had just given birth. No curiosity, no congratulations, no mention of my son at all. Not his name. Not a single word about him. It was like he didn't exist to them, like the most significant moment of my life was nothing more than background noise to their celebration. I lowered the phone slowly, my chest tight, my throat burning. I looked down at my baby sleeping against me, his tiny fingers curled into my hospital blanket, his breathing soft and steady. He was real. He was here. And somehow, to my own family, he was invisible. The weight of that realization pressed down on me harder than any contraction ever had. I felt humiliated, dismissed, and deeply, irreparably hurt. This wasn't ignorance. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a choice. Tyler saw my face change before I said a word. He asked quietly what they said, and when I handed him the phone, he read everything, my mom's voicemail, my dad's comment, Mia's text. I watched his jaw tighten, his eyes darken, the calm he had held on to all day finally shatter. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't pace or swear. He simply said, very clearly and very firmly, "That's enough." Then, without hesitation, he blocked them all. My parents. My sister. Every number. Every contact. He handed the phone back to me and said, "They don't deserve access to you, and they don't deserve to meet our son." For the first time since the night started, I felt protected. Not by blood, not by obligation, but by someone who chose us without question. Tyler sat beside me, one arm around my shoulders, the other resting gently near our baby, and I leaned into him, exhausted and raw and aching in every way imaginable. I didn't argue. I didn't ask him to reconsider. Because deep down, I knew he was right. Anyone who could hear that I was in labor and decide money mattered more had already made their priorities clear. As I lay there in the quiet hospital room, listening to the steady beeping of the monitors and the soft breaths of my newborn son, I understood something with painful clarity. Family isn't who shows up when it's convenient. It's who shows up when it costs them something. And that night, only one person did. They didn't stop. Not after the birth. Not after Tyler blocked them. Not after we made it clear we needed space. Their silence, brief and unsettling, turned out to be nothing more than the calm before another wave of cruelty, one that struck deeper than I could have imagined. It started with an email from my mother. I saw her name in my inbox while I was sitting on the living room couch, cradling my newborn against my chest. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours in days, my stitches still pulled with every movement, and my chest ached from the relentless cycle of nursing. Still, some desperate, deluded part of me hoped, just for a second, that maybe she had finally come to her senses. Maybe she was writing to say she was sorry, to ask how I was doing, to acknowledge that what happened was wrong. But that hope evaporated the moment I opened the message. She didn't ask about the baby. She didn't ask about me. Instead, she launched straight into a list of accusations, cold, calculated, cruel. She said I was ungrateful. She said I was selfish. She said I had deliberately ruined one of the most important nights of Mia's life and that I was too immature to see the bigger picture. According to her, I should have understood the magnitude of the opportunity Mia had that night and had the decency not to interfere with it. She wrote that I had weaponized my pregnancy, as though my labor was something I had staged or scheduled just to spite them. She even went so far as to say that I had humiliated the family by leaving the dinner, as if the shame of my absence was worse than the danger of me giving birth alone. Every line was a deeper knife, carefully aimed, deliberately cruel. Before I had even finished reading it, another notification came through, an email from my father. His was shorter, colder, and somehow more devastating in its sheer emotional vacancy. "You got to the hospital. Stop crying." 7 words. That was all. No greeting. No punctuation beyond the period. No question about whether I was okay. No mention of the child I had brought into the world. It was as if he was talking about a late delivery or a missed appointment, not his daughter giving birth. The indifference in those words struck me harder than any insult could have. I sat there in silence, my son sleeping quietly in my arms, my heart pounding in my chest, and I realized they weren't just angry, they were rewriting reality. They were actively deciding that what happened to me didn't matter. That it never did. But it didn't end there. A day later, I noticed a strange comment on one of my older social media posts. Then another. And another. At first, I thought it was spam. The usernames were clearly fake, nonsense handles with random numbers, no photos, no real followers. But when I read the comments, my stomach turned. They weren't just generic trolling. They were specific. They mocked me for running off and playing the victim. One said, "Guess some people can't stand being second place." Another wrote, "You ruined $1 million night because you couldn't handle a few cramps." Someone messaged me directly, saying, "What kind of mother throws a tantrum on her sister's big night?" The language was unmistakable. The phrasing, the tone, it was them. My family. Or at the very least, Mia. There was no other explanation. These weren't strangers. These were people who knew the details. Who knew exactly how to twist the knife. They used anonymous accounts to say the things they didn't have the nerve to say under their own names. It was cowardly. It was venomous. And it was relentless. Every day, a new comment. A new message. A new dig at my mental health, my motherhood, my decision to cut them off. Some of the posts included sarcastic congratulations on the baby, phrased in a way that made it clear it wasn't congratulations at all. No one said his name. They refused to acknowledge him as a person, as a living, breathing human being who had come into this world through hours of pain and fear and strength. To them, he was just collateral damage in the story they were spinning about how I had wronged them. I tried to ignore it, but it was everywhere. I deleted my Instagram. I locked down my Facebook. I stopped using Twitter. I changed my privacy settings. But still, they found ways. Tyler started checking the comments before I did, intercepting the worst of it, shielding me as best he could. But I saw enough. More than enough. Enough to know that these people, the ones who were supposed to love me, had decided that their pride, their egos, and Mia's fabricated reputation were worth more than my safety, my well-being, or my child's existence. I didn't recognize them anymore. Or maybe I finally saw them clearly for the first time. Because this wasn't just neglect. This wasn't just a bad night or a moment of selfishness. This was targeted cruelty. This was calculated abuse. And the worst part wasn't what they said online. It was what they didn't say. They didn't ask if my son was healthy. They didn't ask if I had torn during delivery. They didn't ask if I was recovering or if I needed help or if I was scared. They didn't ask about his name. Not once. As if withholding recognition of him could somehow erase the fact that he was born without them. And maybe that was the point. Maybe they believed that if they ignored him long enough, if they erased him from their emails and their conversations and their carefully crafted lies, he would become less real. Less of a reminder of what they had done. Less of a symbol of the night they chose to protect Mia's ego over my life. But he is real. He is here. He is mine. And every time I look into his face, I remember exactly who showed up for me when it mattered. And exactly who didn't. I blocked them all. Every number, every email address, every account, even the ones that hadn't messaged me yet but I knew eventually would. I went through my phone methodically, deleting old voicemails, removing photos, wiping contact names that once meant something. I deleted threads of conversations with my mother that stretched back years, texts from birthdays, check-ins from when I was first pregnant, even the obligatory Merry Christmas messages she used to send in group chats. It felt like erasing pieces of a former life, one where I still believed there was unconditional love waiting for me behind the walls of our shared blood. But there was no grief anymore, just a hollow sense of finality and a determination to protect the only family that mattered now, my son, Tyler, and the space we were creating together. I shifted all my focus onto our son. Every cry, every yawn, every sleepy noise he made in the middle of the night was mine to respond to. Every diaper change, every feeding, every long hour of holding him against my chest while the world outside continued on, I met with a kind of raw, sleepless devotion I didn't even know I was capable of. My body was still recovering, my mind still bruised, but I found comfort in the rhythm of those days, bathing him in warm water, folding impossibly small clothes, memorizing the shape of his hands and the weight of his head resting just below my collarbone. He became my center of gravity. And then, a few days into that fragile new world, Tyler's parents arrived from Flagstaff. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't text to see if it was a good time. They simply told us they were coming, packed up their car with fresh groceries, homemade meals, and gifts, and made the 3-hour drive like it was nothing. When they walked through our front door, I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding everything inside me until I saw Tyler's mother set down her bags and wrap me into the kind of hug that doesn't need words. It wasn't overly emotional or dramatic, it was solid, anchoring. Her hands rubbed small circles on my back like I was a child again, and for the first time since labor, I felt my shoulders drop. She didn't ask questions. She didn't probe. She didn't mention what had happened with my family. She just walked into our kitchen, rolled up her sleeves, and took over like it had always been her space. Within an hour, she had organized the fridge, put together a batch of chicken and rice soup, folded our laundry, and was asking Tyler where we kept the spare sheets because she didn't want to leave a mess. She moved through our home with the kind of care that felt almost sacred, quietly easing the chaos that had built up in our absence. Tyler's dad, meanwhile, carried in a stack of children's books and set up shop on the living room floor, flipping through pages like he was already preparing for story time. He had this calm, grounded presence, like no matter what storm had just passed, we were safe now. He didn't hover, didn't try to take over, didn't say anything performative. He just showed up, sat beside the bassinet, and started reading aloud to a baby who couldn't yet understand the words but listened anyway, eyes wide and fixed on the sound of his voice. They asked for nothing. They expected nothing. They gave everything. They brought more than meals and help, they brought validation. They made space for us to breathe. They celebrated our son with genuine awe, holding him like he was the most precious thing they'd ever seen, asking about every little detail, his weight, his feeding schedule, the story behind his name. They said his name over and over, like it was a prayer. They looked at him like he belonged, like he had always been theirs. Tyler's mom cried the first time she held him. His dad took a dozen photos when he yawned. They marveled at how strong he already was, how alert, how he gripped their fingers with tiny fists like he never wanted to let go. They loved him immediately, completely, without hesitation. And I couldn't stop thinking about the contrast. Because the difference wasn't money or distance or whether they had been prepared. The difference was that they showed up. They didn't prioritize a business meeting or a photo op or a social image over real, tangible life. They didn't see my pain as an inconvenience. They didn't treat my child as a disruption. They simply came, without ego, without demands, and loved us the way family is supposed to. 3 weeks later, on a quiet afternoon when the house finally felt calm again, there was a knock at the door that instantly made my stomach drop. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just a cheerful, overly confident knock, the kind that assumes it will be welcomed. I was standing in the living room, our son sleeping against my chest, sunlight spilling through the curtains, and something in my chest tightened before I even moved. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Some instinct, sharpened by weeks of silence and cruelty, already knew. When I opened the door, there they were. My parents. Mia. Standing on our porch like actors arriving late to a scene they thought was still waiting for them. My mom was holding a bundle of pastel balloons that bobbed cheerfully above her head, the strings wrapped carefully around her wrist. My dad had 2 gift bags in his hands, tissue paper sticking out the top. Mia stood slightly behind them, arms folded loosely, wearing a tight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. They hadn't called. They hadn't texted. They hadn't asked if they could come. They had just shown up, as if that alone was supposed to fix everything. My mom's face lit up the second she saw me, her smile wide and rehearsed, like she had practiced it in the car. "There you are," she said brightly, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Look at you. You look great." She leaned forward slightly, craning her neck as if trying to peek past me into the house. "Let's put this behind us," she added lightly, waving one hand in the air as though the last few weeks had been nothing more than a minor misunderstanding. "We brought gifts." I didn't step aside. I didn't smile. I didn't move at all. I stood there in the doorway, one arm instinctively tightening around my son, the other crossing over my chest, physically and emotionally blocking the entrance. My heart was pounding, but my mind was clear in a way it hadn't been before. I looked at the balloons, the gift bags, the carefully constructed performance of reconciliation, and all I could think about was the emails, the messages, the burner accounts, the way they hadn't even spoken my son's name. I tilted my head slightly and met my mother's eyes. "What child?" I said calmly, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. The smile on her face faltered for just a fraction of a second. I didn't stop. "You said he wasn't yours. You said he was an inconvenience. You said Mia's night mattered more." The porch went silent. The balloons rustled softly in the breeze. My dad shifted his weight, his jaw tightening, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Mia rolled her eyes and let out a quiet scoff, like she couldn't believe I was still doing this. My mother blinked, then laughed nervously, waving her hand again like she could brush my words away. "Oh, don't be ridiculous," she said. "You know that's not what we meant. We're here now. That's what matters." I felt something settle inside me then, heavy and resolute. "No," I said. "What mattered was when I was in labor and you told me to call an Uber. What mattered was when I drove myself to the hospital. What mattered was when you blamed me afterward. You don't get to rewrite that just because you brought balloons." Mia stepped forward, her tone sharp and irritated. "God, you really know how to hold a grudge," she said. "Can we just see the baby and move on?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but distance. "You never asked about him," I said. "Not once. You attacked me online instead. You mocked me. You don't get to show up now and pretend you care." My mom's smile finally disappeared. Her voice hardened. "So what, you're punishing us?" she asked. "You're going to keep our grandchild from us over one mistake?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just shook my head slowly. You already made your choice, I said. This isn't punishment. This is a boundary. Behind me, I felt Tyler's presence, steady and solid, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. I didn't need to look back to know he was there. I took one small step back, still blocking the doorway, and met my mother's gaze one last time. You don't get access to my child just because it's convenient now, I said quietly. You didn't show up when it mattered. I closed the door gently but firmly, the click of the lock echoing through the house. Inside, my son stirred slightly against my chest, then settled again, safe and warm. And for the first time since that night in labor, I felt completely at peace with my decision. Tyler stood right behind me, his presence calm but unshakable, and the moment he saw the look on my mother's face, the way she tried to smile her way out of accountability, he stepped forward. His voice was low and firm, the kind of steady that came from deep anger restrained only by necessity. You laughed when she was in labor, he said, his eyes locked on my parents. You told her, not our grandchild. I heard the voicemail. I read the messages. Don't act like it didn't happen. My mother blinked like she couldn't believe he had said it out loud. My father narrowed his eyes, clearly bracing for confrontation, while Mia shifted uncomfortably behind them, her arms now crossed in the same defensive posture I had taken. For a moment, no one spoke. They didn't deny it, not directly. Instead, my father exhaled like he was explaining something to a stubborn child and said, it was about the future. That night was important for Mia. You could have understood that if you weren't always so emotional. Then my mother chimed in, her voice pitched with that clipped tone she used when trying to control a situation she had already lost. We didn't mean to hurt you, she said. But you have to understand, Liam's funding round was critical. That dinner was more important, I finished for her, my voice flat. Mia's life was more important. That's what you're saying. She hesitated, then nodded once, without shame. In that moment, yes. The clarity of it hit like a slap, but it didn't hurt the way I thought it would. If anything, it confirmed everything I had already accepted in the weeks since. I looked at each of them, my mother, my father, my sister, and saw nothing I wanted near my son. I felt no desire to explain myself again. No desperation for closure. Just a clean, absolute conviction. I want you to leave, I said, arms still crossed, my body a physical barrier between them and the life they had chosen to ignore. Now. My mother's mouth fell open slightly, and her eyes narrowed in disbelief. You're being dramatic, she snapped. You're overreacting. We came here to make peace. I laughed once, short, humorless, and shook my head. No. You came here to make yourselves feel better. That's not the same thing. Mia scoffed behind them, muttering something under her breath that sounded like, unbelievable, and that was it for me. I had given them the chance to tell the truth, to acknowledge what they had done, and they chose, again, to double down. So I said it, not with anger, not with theatrics, but with the kind of finality that only comes when someone crosses a line so clearly they can never return. You made your choice, I said, my voice calm, unwavering. Now live with it. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't want to hear one. I stepped back inside and closed the door, locking it without hesitation. On the other side, I heard the muffled sound of my mother's voice rising, followed by my father telling her to drop it. Then footsteps. Then silence. The balloons, gift bags, and apologies that had arrived too late sat untouched on the porch. And inside, I exhaled, for the last time, I let them go. Weeks passed before I heard from them again, and when I did, it wasn't through a call or a knock at the door, it was another email, this time from my mother's address, though the tone was clearly collaborative, like it had been drafted by all three of them. I opened it only because some small part of me, despite everything, still clung to the faint possibility of an apology, a sliver of decency buried somewhere beneath the layers of manipulation and pride. But that hope was extinguished within seconds of reading the first line. There were no apologies. Not even the performance of one. No accountability, no reflection, no change. Just more deflection, more rationalizing, more of the same empty, condescending tone they had adopted since the night they let me leave in labor. The email read like a press release, carefully worded to avoid responsibility while still framing themselves as the victims. My mother wrote that the whole thing had been blown out of proportion, that emotions had been running high, and that we needed to look at the bigger picture. According to her, we were being unfair, unreasonable, and ungrateful. She insisted again that the night had been important for the family's future, that Mia and Liam had been under a tremendous amount of pressure, and that we had chosen to misinterpret their actions. She never mentioned the moment she told me, while I was in active labor, that it wasn't her grandchild. She didn't mention the voicemail where she said Liam's startup would shape Mia's future, or the way they had mocked me with burner accounts, or how they had stood on my porch with gift bags and entitlement but not one word of accountability. There was no acknowledgement of my son. Not his name, not a question about how he was doing, not a single line that recognized he even existed. They spoke as if I had stormed out of a party in a huff, not as if I had delivered a child alone while they sat through dessert and made jokes at my expense. Their version of reconciliation had no room for truth, only image, only control. They still believed that showing up with balloons erased the fact that they had abandoned me. They still believed Liam's startup mattered more than my life. I stared at the screen for a long time, rereading the message, feeling the familiar waves of numbness and disbelief wash over me again. Then I called Tyler into the room, handed him my laptop, and let him read it without saying a word. His expression didn't change much as he scrolled. He had stopped expecting anything different from them too, but by the time he reached the end, he shut the screen and looked at me with the kind of quiet disgust that didn't need to be explained. "That's it," he said. "We're done with this." And I nodded. We blocked the email addresses, his and mine. Set up filters so nothing from them would ever reach us again. It wasn't even a decision anymore, it was a necessity. I wasn't going to give them one more ounce of emotional bandwidth. They had shown us exactly who they were, over and over, and we were finally listening. There was no fight left, no need for confrontation. Just silence. That evening, we sat down with Tyler's parents after dinner. His mom was folding tiny onesies on the living room couch, his dad was finishing the last page of a picture book he had started reading to our son, and for the first time, we told them everything. Not just the hospital story, which they had already heard in fragments, but the messages, the emails, the social media harassment, the unannounced visit, the total erasure of our child from their version of events. We laid it all out, every cruel word, every calculated omission. They listened without interrupting. His mother's hands froze mid-fold, her jaw tightening with every detail. His father sat forward, elbows on his knees, the kind of tension building in his shoulders that only comes from restrained anger. When we finished, there was a heavy silence between all of us. Then his mom shook her head slowly and said, "That's not just hurtful. That's dehumanizing." His dad didn't say much. Just looked at me and said, "You did the right thing. Both of you. You cut them out before they could do more damage. That takes strength." I didn't realize I'd been waiting for that validation until it came. I didn't realize how much it meant, not just to be believed, but to be supported without conditions. They didn't try to minimize it. They didn't ask if we were sure. They didn't encourage us to reach out or find common ground. They understood instinctively what my own family refused to, that protecting our child from harm, including emotional harm, is not a punishment. It's parenting. Tyler's mom hugged me before bed that night. Not with pity, but with pride. She looked me in the eye and said, "He's lucky to have you as his mom." And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Months passed. Not in a dramatic, sweeping way, but in slow, quiet days that blurred into each other as we learned what life looked like in our new, carefully protected world. In the absence of all that chaos and noise, something softer began to take root. There were no more unexpected emails. No more burner accounts. No more drives to the hospital in silence, no more staring at phones waiting for apologies that would never come. There was just us. Me, Tyler, our son, and the few people who had proven themselves when everything else fell apart. Every morning began with the sound of our son waking up in his crib, soft gurgles, tiny yawns, that half-laugh babies make when they stretch for the first time. I would roll out of bed, still sore in places that only I noticed, and walk barefoot across the creaky floor to scoop him up. He would blink up at me with those wide, trusting eyes, and even after weeks of this routine, I never stopped being floored by the fact that he was mine. That I had done this. That despite everything they had said, every word meant to tear me down, I had brought a human being into the world, and he was thriving. Tyler became the kind of father I hadn't even dared to dream of. He didn't just help, he showed up fully. He memorized feeding schedules, changed diapers at 3 a.m., learned the rhythms of our son's cries and needs with an intuition that left me in awe. We grew into this new role together, not perfectly, but with love and intention. Every choice we made was with our son in mind, and it made the rest of the world feel distant and unnecessary. And then, just as our lives began to stabilize, we heard about Mia. It came casually, through someone Tyler knew from work who still followed Liam on LinkedIn. The funding had collapsed. Investors pulled out. The revolutionary startup that our entire family had practically canonized turned out to be nothing more than overhyped tech vapor with no product, no roadmap, and no leadership capable of holding it together. Within a month of our son's birth, Liam's name had vanished from the tech blogs, his carefully curated social profiles turned private, and Mia's posts shifted from engagement photos to inspirational quotes with vague captions. We didn't go looking for updates, but they still found their way to us. Apparently, Mia and Liam had broken up, publicly, bitterly, and with just enough mutual friends involved that the drama trickled down into our peripheral awareness. She had moved back in with my parents, and according to what we heard, the atmosphere inside that house was bleak. The three of them, once so smug, so proud, so sure they were investing in the right future, were now stuck under the same roof, surrounded by reminders of a plan that had imploded spectacularly. The money dried up faster than anyone expected. Without Liam's promised windfall, my parents were forced to scale everything back. The renovations they'd started on the kitchen stopped mid-construction. The luxury SUV my dad leased went back to the dealership. My mom, who once threw dinner parties with catered hors d'oeuvres and imported wine, was now clipping coupons and quietly returning designer clothes she hadn't even worn. The social circle they'd wrapped around themselves, business people, old college friends, Mia's networking contacts, started to evaporate too. People noticed when money and power faded. People pulled back. Invitations stopped coming. And through it all, not once did they reach out to ask about my son. Not his name. Not a photo. Not whether he was healthy, safe, loved. Not even when the people they'd chosen over him were gone. That silence became its own kind of closure. Not angry, not loud, just clear. While they spiraled in the house they once treated like a throne room, we built a home. Tyler's parents became our foundation. They drove down from Flagstaff regularly, bringing more than just food and supplies, they brought peace, patience, and the kind of love that didn't come with conditions. Tyler's mom would take over the kitchen without asking, humming as she chopped vegetables, always pausing to check on me and ask how I was sleeping. She never pried about my family. She just held space for the hurt without making me explain it. She started calling our son her heart, and I knew she meant it. Tyler's dad spent hours reading to the baby, often long after he had fallen asleep in his lap. He fixed things around the house. Repaired the dishwasher. Hung curtains. Built a tiny bookshelf shaped like a tree, just because I once said I liked the idea. He didn't try to fix what had happened, he simply showed me what it looked like when someone chose to stay. Haley, my best friend, remained our steady center. She never asked for updates, never pushed for information. She just came by when she could, brought coffee when I forgot how to function, texted at night to ask, "You okay?" in those few quiet minutes when I was alone with my thoughts. When I told her what happened with Mia and Liam, she didn't gloat. She just nodded and said, "Doesn't change anything. You did the right thing." And I believed her. The family we had was the one we chose, the one that rose up when everything collapsed. There were no elaborate apologies. No grand gestures. Just people who showed up when it mattered. I found myself thinking less and less about the people who once shared my last name. Their absence no longer felt like a wound, it became a space I protected. A silence I welcomed. I didn't look at photos. I didn't reread emails. I didn't revisit the memory of that night in Chandler, Arizona, sitting at their table while contractions tore through my body and they told me I was ruining Mia's moment. I didn't need to. That story was over. What mattered now was what came after. My son took his first laugh one morning while Tyler was bouncing him gently on his knee. It was a small sound, bright and breathy, but it cracked something wide open in me. I laughed with him, tears spilling down my cheeks, not from sadness but from the overwhelming feeling that we had survived something awful and made something beautiful anyway. That laugh didn't echo through a house full of cold, calculating people. It filled our home, the one we made from scratch, with nothing but intention and love. And I knew then, fully, finally, that we hadn't lost a family. We had shed one. What we built in its place wasn't just functional. It was real. It was enough. Tyler. Our son. His parents. Haley. That was our family. That was everything we needed. The rest? Dead to us.